Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at Noon, President Park Geun-hye calls on rival party leaders to get behind her economic revitalization drive, but she butts heads with the chief of the main opposition over a number of issues. The possible deployment to the Korean peninsula of a U.S. missile defense system called THAAD is stirring tension between China and the U.S. as Seoul and Washington gear up for high-level talks on the issue next month. Plus, representatives of South Korean companies operating at the inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Park are currently in the north to discuss Pyongyang's unilateral decision to hike wages at the complex. These stories and more on Newsline at Noon.
It's noon Wednesday, March 18th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. We start with the wage tussle just north of the inter-Korean border. Taking matters into their own hands, some South Korean businessmen are currently locked in talks with North Korean officials at the Kaesong Industrial Complex to try and find a solution to this intensifying row.
Now, tensions have been brewing ever since North Korea called for a unilateral raise for its workers last month. For more, let's go live to our correspondent Park Geun-hye, who's standing by near the inter-Korean border. Now, Seong-hye, what message do the South Korean businessmen have for North Korea?
Well, Jin-joo, the message is quite clear. They don't want the factory park to be influenced by political tensions anymore. Now, that was one of the key agreements reached between the two Koreas when they reopened the Kaesong Industrial Complex after its 5-month-long suspension back in 2013. Take a listen.
We will explain to the North Korean officials on what kind of problems can arise from a unilateral revision of regulations in the overall management of the complex and ask for the park to be managed according to previous agreements.
The 14 businessmen who departed for Kaesong this morning blamed anti-North Korea leaflet launches by South Korean activists for stirring up tensions and halting talks between the two Koreas. They say North Korea's demands, which is basically a wage hike for their workers from the current $70 a month to $74, and the revision of regulations are something that could be resolved peacefully if it wasn't for such tensions.
And Seong-hye, North Korea actually called for a meeting with South Korean firms yesterday, right?
That's right, Mark, but no South Korean representatives turned up. That's because the South Korean government told them not to respond and instead called for a separate meeting yesterday afternoon. So we don't know for sure whether the group that went in will actually meet with North Korean officials there today. One businessman that I talked to said they are hoping to meet with Park Geun-hye, who is the North Korean official that oversees the management of the complex, since he apparently came to the border town for yesterday's meeting. But even if a meeting does take place today, the businessmen are in a tough spot since the South Korean government has told the companies not to abide by Pyongyang's demands and has warned that it will penalize any firms that do.
So what are the South Korean businessmen saying about this? And there must be concerns that the situation could get out of hand fast.
That's right, Jin-joo. They're very, very concerned, obviously, but the instability is also already causing them very much damage in their business operations. One businessman complaining to me this morning that the textiles factories in Kaesong are losing their clients to factories in Singapore because of this instability. But still, they are hoping to ease tensions through dialogue because they believe a complete shutdown of the park is not in North Korea's interest. The complex has a symbolic significance as the last remaining link of economic cooperation between the two Koreas. Now, the businessmen will return at around 4 p.m. Korea time, so around 4 hours from now, so we will have to wait and see if they did reach any agreement. This has been Park Geun-hye reporting live from the Inter-Korean Transit Office in Paju.
Thank you, Songy, for that. And moving on, South Korea is calling on third parties to stay out of its domestic security affairs after China and the U.S. made their feelings clear this week about where they stand on the possible deployment of a U.S. missile defense system to the Korean peninsula. Son Jung-in reports.
Just a day after China voiced concerns over the possible deployment of a THAAD missile defense system in South Korea, the United States said China doesn't have a say in the matter.
Well, I find it curious that a third country would presume to make strong representations about a security system that has not been put in place and that is still a matter of theory.
Chinese Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs Lu Jianchao told reporters in Seoul on Monday that China hopes South Korea will consider Beijing's concerns before deploying the U.S.-led missile defense system. But following talks with senior South Korean officials in Seoul on Tuesday, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell said that is purely for countering North Korean threats and that its deployment is up to South Korea.
It is for the Republic of Korea to decide what measures it will take in its own alliance defense and when.
South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se echoed Russell's words while speaking to reporters, but added there were no official talks about THAAD deployment.
As for THAAD, there is currently no development. The government will consider all factors, including security, before reaching a decision that will maximize our national interest.
But as the foreign ministry teeters between Seoul's closest partners, the defense ministry was much more blunt, saying that neighboring countries should not weigh in on South Korea's security policy. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
And South Korea and the United States will reportedly discuss the potential deployment of the THAAD missile defense system to the Korean peninsula during some high-level security talks in Washington next month. But what exactly is THAAD? And why is it already stirring up so much debate? Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The U.S. missile defense system known as THAAD is built to intercept incoming tactical and ballistic missiles at a range of up to 200 kilometers. The system uses kinetic energy with a hit-to-kill method that in turn creates an upper-tier defense shield. It's also equipped with a sophisticated radar system that has a range of up to 2,000 kilometers. This is widely considered to be the reason why Beijing is so strongly against its potential deployment to the Korean peninsula, as a radar will be able to cover Beijing and its surrounding areas. However, the U.S. says THAAD will enhance South Korea's ability to deal with Pyongyang's nuclear and ballistic missile threats, as well as enhancing surveillance on the communist regime. But critics see the possible deployment as Washington's attempt to reel in its Asian ally into its missile defense program. South Korea has acknowledged the battery would enhance its national security, but says it has no plans to buy the multi-billion-dollar system. Military sources say the issue will likely be addressed at the South Korea-U.S. biannual integrated defense dialogue set for mid-April in Washington. The sources add that South Korea's Deputy Minister for National Defense Policy, Ryu Seung-jae, and U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia, David Helvey, will represent the two sides at next month's meeting. South Korea has stressed on numerous occasions that it's developing its own low-tier missile defense system to protect the country against the North's missile threats. The so-called Korea Air Missile Defense and Kill Chain systems are set to be implemented by 2023. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
The United States says it's up to Seoul to decide whether it wants to join the China-led Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. At a regular press briefing on Tuesday, U.S. State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki said the decision on whether to join the AIIB rests squarely on each sovereign country, and that includes South Korea. But Psaki also said it's important for prospective members to push for the adoption of high standards, adding that Washington believes there's a need to enhance infrastructure investment with the international community. She said the multilateral institution should closely follow the high standards established at the World Bank and the Regional Development Bank. Now, Britain announced just last week that it would join this China-led bank, becoming the first Western country to do so.
The U.S. may have been behind the massive internet outage in North Korea last December following the cyber attack on Sony Pictures in November. A top U.S. lawmaker on cybersecurity issues said Tuesday the internet outage in the North was an act of retaliation for the Sony hack, becoming the first public official to make the acknowledgement. Representative Michael McCall, the chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, said, quote, "There were some cyber responses to North Korea." He said the internet blackout was one of the responses, but did not say whether the U.S. was behind it or not. Washington has accused Pyongyang of disrupting computers at Sony Pictures Entertainment and leaking internal content. Ahead of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit to the U.S. this spring, Washington has emphasized the importance of improved and strong relations between Seoul and Tokyo. The White House said U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice made the remarks in a meeting with her Japanese counterpart Shotaro Yachi on Tuesday, but did not reveal further details. The two are known to have discussed bilateral cooperation on regional and global security issues, including North Korea's missile and nuclear programs and maritime security in East Asia. The agenda and schedule of Abe's visit to the U.S. was fine-tuned as well. The exact date of his trip has yet to be confirmed, but it will be the first visit by a Japanese leader to Washington since 2006.
President Park Geun-hye held talks on Tuesday with the leaders of Korea's two main political parties. The three were looking to find some common ground on reviving the nation's flagging economy. However, as you'd expect, there were some differences on a handful of major issues. Our Chae-sun has more.
After a brief exchange of greetings with the leaders of the ruling and opposition parties, President Park got down to business, addressing her recent Middle East trip.
앞으로 이 중동 순방의 결과들이 결실들이 우리 국민과 또 기업들에게 더 큰 혜택으로 돌아가고 또 그래서 다시 한번 경제가 크게 일어나는 그런 어떤 초석이 될 수 있도록 국민께서 많이 도와주시기를 부탁드립니다.
She also urged the parliament to swiftly pass pending bills aimed at creating jobs and revitalizing the economy. While promising his party's cooperation, opposition leader Moon Jae-in said that the government's economic and welfare policies have failed to improve the people's livelihood.
We need to change policies and increase household income for growth. I propose first addressing 4 livelihood tasks.
The 4 tasks Moon listed were a significant increase in Korea's minimum wage, generating welfare funding by expanding taxes on corporations and high-income earners, and addressing the problems of rising housing rental prices and household debt. President Park rebutted Moon's claims, saying the opposition's proposed artificial income increase could lead to more taxes and reduce corporate activity. She added the government is already taking measures to handle the 4 tasks listed by the opposition leader. As for improving inter-Korean relations, Moon said Seoul should first seek to boost economic cooperation with Pyongyang and make efforts to hold an inter-Korean summit this year. While President Park has opened a channel to more actively communicate with the leaders of both the ruling and opposition parties, time will tell how Tuesday's meeting will affect state affairs down the road. Choi-Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Now, Korea's unemployment rate rose last month for the 5th straight year due to seasonal factors, including the graduation season. And though it may sound odd, job creation was also up last month from the previous year, and more Koreans actually found jobs than in the month before. Our Shin Se-min has the details.
Korea's real unemployment rate hit a record high of 12.5% in February. Statistics Korea said Wednesday that the rate is much higher than the country's actual jobless rate. The real unemployment rate includes those who are either looking for a job or are underemployed, or those who have given up looking for a job. It is much broader than the underemployment rate, which only calculates the number of people who want jobs but have failed to get one. The rate is 3 times as high as the actual jobless rate, which hit a 5-year high of 4.6% last month. That's an increase from the 3.8% in January and 0.1 percentage point higher than the year before. The Statistical Office attributed the high jobless figure to seasonal factors. February is when students in Korea graduate, pushing the unemployment rate up the month. Despite the rise in the unemployment rate, the number of jobs rose last month and more Koreans found jobs. Over 370,000 new jobs were created last month compared to the year before. That was higher than the 347,000 new jobs created in January, but still fell short of the 422,000 new jobs created in December. The number of employed people topped some 25.2 million last month from less than 25.1 million in January. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
It's not just diplomatic relations between Seoul and Tokyo that have hit new lows in recent years. Trade between the two countries last year also plunged to its lowest levels since the 2008 global financial crisis. Now, experts say that with the yen likely to stay weak for some time, trade volume will likely drop to new depths this year. Kim Min-ji has the details.
Korea's trade with Japan has been heading downhill due mainly to the falling value of the Japanese yen. According to the Korea International Trade Association, bilateral trade between the two countries came to about $86 billion last year, down 9.2% from a year earlier. Korea's exports to Japan slumped about 7% to $32 billion, while imports fell more than 10% to almost $54 billion. This marks the 3rd straight year that the bilateral trade volume has dropped after peaking in 2011. Preliminary data shows that trade between the two countries also fell almost 14% in the first 2 months of this year to about $10 billion. The decline has mainly been attributed to the weak yen.
The falling value of the Japanese yen has made Korean products less competitive in terms of price in Japan, and that's resulted in lower demand. Japan has also increased production overseas, so imports out of Japan have seen a decline.
Experts forecast the downward trend will continue as Japan's monetary stimulus programs will keep the volume of the yen down. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
As part of its push for deep financial sector reforms, Korea's new Financial Services Commission chief has taken the bold step of vowing to strip away a cumbersome regulation. The commission says Im Jong-ryong will eliminate a so-called 3-strike system by the end of the year. Financial institutions had complained the rule hampered their efforts to expand. Under the regulation, entities that received 3 warnings for regulatory violations were subject to a 3-year restriction on pursuing mergers and acquisitions, starting new businesses, and expanding to overseas markets.
The U.S. Federal Reserve is expected to clarify the timing for its first interest rate hike since 2006, when it wraps up its 2-day meeting on Wednesday local time. The U.S. is now the only country potentially going against the trend of global monetary easing. For more on the market speculation on the Fed's next move and its impact on the Korean economy, our Hwang Ji-hye reports.
Investors broadly forecast that the U.S. Federal Reserve will signal on a rate rise in June by dropping the word patient from its official policy statement set to be released on Wednesday local time. Improving jobs data is stoking such expectations.
There's been a very clear trend towards improvement. We saw that in the February payrolls that we received recently. So I think the odds are that they will remove patient from the statement, sort of indicating that they're within a couple of meetings of that initial rate hike.
But the surging U.S. dollar that came on the back of such forecasts and the European Central Bank printing more euros is clouding the timing of a rate rise. The soaring greenback erodes the price competitiveness of U.S. exporters in the global market and could hurt the pace of recovery. The Fed's next move also comes in an environment of sluggish global demand and slowing growth, where more than 20 central banks across the globe have eased policy this year to revive ailing economies. And Korea is no exception.
The Fed's decision on its key rate has largely affected Korea's key rate. But now Korea's interest rate is more affected by monetary policies in regions other than the U.S.
There are concerns, though, of a massive capital outflow from Korea in the face of the Fed's possible rate hike and a record low key rate. The good news is that Korea is now less vulnerable to such risks.
Korea continues to post a current account surplus, and this leads to increasing foreign exchange reserves. That will help Korea absorb shocks coming from capital outflows.
The Bank of Korea governor, however, has cautioned against too much optimism, saying the central bank will closely monitor risks related to capital outflows. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Time now for a look through the global headlines we're following on this Wednesday lunchtime. For that, we connect to Eunice Kim at the News Center.
Eunice, vote counting is well underway in Israel after millions there cast their ballots on Tuesday. Sitting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has already claimed victory for his Likud party, despite exit poll results showing it was virtually tied with the opposition Zionist Union.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. Now, in the event of a tie, pundits say Mr. Netanyahu's Likud party is better positioned to produce a coalition government than his main rival, Mr. Isaac Herzog's Zionist Union, thus that early victory speech. But it bears repeating, this race is not over yet. Euphoria had filled the main party headquarters in Tel Aviv, where Mr. Netanyahu told a roaring crowd against all odds, a great victory for Likud. Opponents, though, say they will wait for the final results, which are not expected until Wednesday morning local time. Exit polls had showed Likud and the center-left Zionist Union either locked at 27 seats each or Likud leading by 1 at 28. Barring a simple majority of 61, the winning party will have to form a coalition government in the 120-member Knesset, Israel's parliament, before a prime minister is named, a process that could take several weeks. Emerging as the key issues in this race are less security issues as they were in the past, and more to domestic issues related to soaring costs of living and also housing prices. Polls ahead of Tuesday's election showed 54-year-old Herzog catching up or exceeding Netanyahu's lead. He is a former minister of housing, welfare, and social services, hailing from Israel's powerful and wealthy political dynasty launched by his grandfather, who was chief rabbi of Israel in the 50s. An American Air Force veteran has been charged with trying to join and provide material support to the Islamic State group. According to a complaint and indictment recently released, 47-year-old Thyroid Nathan Webster Pugh had been recently fired from his job as an airplane mechanic when he was caught in January trying to cross into Syria via Egypt and Turkey. Turkish officials caught the 4-year veteran and deported him back to the U.S. The documents also said federal agents had found internet searches on IS on his laptop and other devices. Pugh is expected to plead not guilty when he is arraigned at a Brooklyn federal court early Wednesday, local time. And finally, scientists in Spain believe they've discovered the remains of author Miguel de Cervantes, the great mind behind the novel Don Quixote. The find comes after years of mystery surrounding the exact location of his body and ahead of the 400-year anniversary of his death. Using radar technology, investigators mapped out dozens of burial cavities at a 17th century convent, and a deep excavation turned up several remains. While stating DNA tests likely won't be possible due to the decayed nature of the remains, the lead investigator said historical, archaeological, and anthropological data all pointed to some of those fragments belonging to the celebrated author.
Well, it's going to be a rainy day today. The southern province have receiving heavy rainfall since early this morning. Well, it's not raining right now here in the capital just yet, but it will soon starting this afternoon. Up to 80 millimeters of heavy showers are in store for the southern provinces, and Jeju and the southern parts of Jeollado province have already received over 50 millimeters, and a heavy rain advisory was issued there. In the meantime, Seoul and the surrounding areas will see a light rain starting this afternoon, which is likely to linger till tomorrow morning. But there shouldn't be any big changes in temperatures for the upper parts of the country today, as the daytime high here in Seoul will hike up to 14, but it will be much cooler down south as Daegu and Busan will rise to 11 and 13 respectively. And as for the other regions, Jeju Island and Daejeon should see a high of 19 and 13, while Dokdo rises to 11. Even after the rain, the temperatures won't drop that much. In fact, it will be way warmer than the seasonal averages, and it will have those pleasant readings for the time being. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Join us again at the same time on Thursday. Thank you for watching.